Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a recommendation video based on the idea of LGBTQIA+ books that focus on queer communities. There's a couple different ways that queer communities are expressed in books. I think one of the ones that we always think of is found family. This is a dynamic between a group of people where they feel like they have bonded, where they are family, and it's especially important in queer novels or queer coded novels because it's this sense of community, family that you're not getting from your official or, blood family because probably you are queer. So you've either been physically ostracized, emotionally ostracized, or figuratively, you just don't feel like you connect to your family because of your identity, but you found family inside a queer space. I think for the most part, when I think of found family, I think of people normally being the same age. There can be some variations with people a little bit older being mentors to a younger group. I think there is room for found family with different types of age dynamics, but for the most part, it's a small, closely knitted group of like-minded queer individuals. Another one we see a lot is the queer friend group. This is mainly super popular in YA novels, and it's where you have a group of closely knit friends that are mostly, if not all, queer. These books can be really valuable, especially for young queer readers who might not feel like they have a place, might not feel like they have the closest knit group of friends, or it can be a reflection of what they are experiencing in real life. I love older queer friend groups as well, but I would say for the most part you see the queer group where it's mostly queer people with young YA books. And then the other dynamic is the queer community at large. So there are different age groups. Not everybody is so closely knitted together as like friend groups. What I personally value in queer communities represented in books is like the idea of older generations mentoring the younger generations in strictly platonic, really wholesome ways. I really like seeing like wholesome interactions between different age groups, people that are just coming into their identity, into their queerness, and are unsure of things, and people that are already established and know a lot about queer community and can teach that stuff to a younger generation. I think it's really valuable to show different kinds of groups interacting with each other in these spaces. I think it's really important to see the spaces themselves. It can be a community that's focused on one type of thing, maybe drag racing or roller derby, and they make a space where there is a larger community, different friend groups interacting with each other, different age groups interacting with each other, forming different emotional bonds. I think there's values in all three different types of relationships, but the one I want to see more of is the queer community at large, especially like with mentor figures and younger characters. I think it's really valuable to show these kind of relationships. I think a lot of times media, that are run by heteronormative people tend to take out mentor relationships. They tend to make them romantic. And I think for me and a lot of other people, that's really upsetting because those relationships are really important, especially to showing like the larger queer community. We're not all just like romantically involved with each other. The best example I can think of this is Little Fires Everywhere. In the book, the main character Mia never states her identity, but it can be kind of implied through the coding of the book that she is queer in some way. I personally see her as Aro Ace because she specifically states that she has never wanted a romantic relationship. It's not really important to her, and that she's never had a sexual relationship, and it's just not something that's important to her. But she forms a really great bond with her art teacher that is overseeing her at university, and this art teacher has a lover and she is a lesbian, and she forms like a really great platonic bond between her mentor figure and herself. But what they do in the TV show is that they strip that away to make a closer knit relationship between the two characters, and they make it a sexual relationship. I really liked seeing Mia as a bi woman. I thought that was really powerful to see her so strong in her bisexuality, but again, it took something away for me because I think it was so important seeing the platonic relationship. One of the strongest queer stereotypes, of course, is older people perverting a younger generation, making them be gay, forcing them into sexual acts, and having like unhealthy relationship dynamics. This one is showing a teacher-student relationship dynamic, which is really weird and toxic and uncomfortable, especially because it wasn't there in the original. It's even setting that harmful stereotype that the TV show adds aside, it just takes away such a powerful mentor relationship. So again, I would like to see more queer communities, more mentor relationships between queer queer people. But I want to introduce some of my favorite books that are in some of these categories. Hopefully I'm giving you some recommendations, and hopefully you can give me some good recommendations of these kind of dynamics. So first off, we're going to start with the queer friend group. There are a lot of great friend groups in books. It's one of my favorite things to explore in books, but I'm specifically choosing queer friend groups for this. I love the Raven Cycle. I think a lot of the characters are queer coded, but technically it's not a majority queer book. There's also books like Cemetery Boys, Red, White, and Royal Blue. Obviously they have really fun queer characters. The books themselves feel very queer, but I specifically was looking for where there was a majority friend group with queer characters. It's not just the main character and their love interests that are queer, and I'm looking for more than 3 people that are queer. So the first book I want to start off with is Heartstopper. Really all of Alice Oseman's books, but mainly I'm thinking about Heartstopper. Heartstopper follows the high school rom-com slice of life romance between Charlie and Nick. It's mainly their love story, their trials and tribulations growing up queer, discovering themselves, that kind of thing. But one of the things that I love about this series as it slowly evolves is the queer friend group that's kind of coming out. At first, the 2 main characters feel very isolated. They don't have a lot of friends, or they don't have really strong relationships with their friends. But as the web series goes on, we're slowly introduced to more and more queer characters, and they're kind of making their own new kind of friend group. There is a lesbian couple, there is a trans character, and I just really love seeing this friend group come together and evolve. The friend group is mainly Charlie's friend group at the beginning of the story, but they slowly come together as a fully formed friend group, and it's just really nice to read about, and I hope that the comic explores more of that friend group because, again, it's just really lovely to see. Another book with a queer friend group is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. Everybody in this book is queer. This is a adult romance book with a speculative or magical twist in it. August has just come to New York City, has just moved into a new apartment, and over the book she slowly becomes friends with her roommates and their friends. There is a trans roommate and his girlfriend. There is a gay roommate who kind of has an on and off relationship with a drag queen. There's another pansexual drag queen who has a love interest. Obviously August herself is bisexual and has a lesbian romantic interest, but that's not the whole story because, again, there are just so many queer characters. I was thinking of putting this book in queer community spaces because there is this sense like of this giant like queer community that is revolving around August, but I ultimately decided to put it in friend group because almost everybody is the same age. I've seen a lot of really valid critiques about this book and how it deals with like racism, how it doesn't deal with racism, and I think that's an important topic to have. But another really interesting thing about this book is that August is falling in love with a woman who is from the 1970s, and a big part of queer history is that we've lost a lot of our mentor figures. We've lost a lot of community members to violence, a lot of community members to the AIDS epidemic, and so this book is really interesting because it kind of touches on that queer history. There's a lot of subtle nods to it, especially with one of the characters being from the 1970s, but there's also like an absence of older community members, and there's kind of not really a discussion of why those community members are absent. And I don't want to get into a full critique on this book, even though I think a lot of critiques are really interesting and valid, but that is the main reason why this book is queer friend group. I felt a really warm feeling of acceptance reading this book with just like everybody being queer, and I think there is a lot of value in the friend group dynamic, but I wouldn't quite classify it as a queer community because it is missing older members. The next relationship dynamic we're going to go into is found family. Like friendship dynamics, I can think of a lot of books that have really great representations of found family. The main one I'm thinking of is A Long Slow Way to an Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I couldn't add that book on the list because only 3-ish of the characters are stated as queer, and again couldn't add things like The Raven Boys or books like We Ride Upon Sticks or any other examples of like found family because, again, not a majority of the members in that family are queer, and I'm looking for specifically queer families. But one found family I really want to recommend is The Weight of the Stars by Kay Akram. There are non-queer people in this friend group, but it just feels very queer. This book follows our main character who's like this butch lesbian named Ryan Bird, and she kind of is like this mean, snarky individual who kind of takes in misfits, and a lot of those misfits happen to be queer people. She has a sapphic relationship in this book, and her brother, I believe it's her brother, has a romantic relationship with another boy. I think there is also a straight relationship, but they feel very queer to me. One of my favorite things about this book was like the sense of queer found family. Like they didn't always get along with each other. There was like this sense of being like misfits together, of being kind of rough around the edges, and I just really loved that dynamic. And I think this is a great example of a queer found family. And for my final recommendation, I'm going to get into the books that I feel have a really good sense of queer community. And again, the difference between queer communities and found families or friend groups is that the community is a little bit larger. Not everybody in the community might be friends, but there is this sense of connection. And especially important to me in the queer community is the idea of mentors, older people intersecting, teaching, helping the younger generation. I think one great example of this is The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill. I've only read the first 2 books, and the third one came out recently or is about to come out. It's kind of a mix between a graphic novel and a picture book about these people taking care of tea dragons, which are just these cute little dragons that can grow tea out of their heads. This series explores a couple different characters. Most, if not all of them, are queer in some way. And again, there is an older couple that is teaching these younger people how to care for tea dragons, and they get to tell their own story, and it's just really cute and sweet. And again, I just love the idea of older community members being mentors to younger people. Another book I have in here, and the one that inspired this video, is Bruised by Tanya Bodeju. Her debut novel is Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens, which I haven't read yet, but it is about the drag community. Obviously, I haven't read it, so I can't recommend it, but I really want to read it because I'm assuming that it has a strong sense of queer community just based on this one. I recently did a review of this, so I don't want to give too much of my thoughts, feelings, and opinions on this because you can check out that review if you want to know more. But this book is all about Daya, who's entering the roller derby community. She has a love interest, she has queer friends outside of roller derby, she has queer or queer-coded teammates, and she has older queer mentors. And I think that is just really important, and I really got the sense of a community from this book. And this is the book that made me start thinking about what other books have I read that have this kind of space, what other books kind of have mentor relationships. And that book in particular really got me thinking about the distinctions between queer friend groups, queer found families, and queer communities. And I do think that this is the best example of a queer community that I have seen so far. And the last book I have for queer communities is Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera. This book follows Juliet as she goes across the country to be a summer intern for this woman that she really admires. Juliet is a lesbian and she doesn't really feel like she's accepted at home. She doesn't really feel the sense of a community, but she gets to be this intern for this amazing lesbian that she has like admired for years. But when she gets there, it's not the perfect relationship that she was hoping for. This book is really an intersection between feminism, between queer identities, and how race intersects those spaces. Juliet doesn't find the perfect relationship between her and her white feminist idol, but she does find other community members to surround her with. This book especially is really interesting because it's mostly people that are older than Juliet. There are older people of color taking her in, kind of telling her about things, teaching her about things, and she enters a sci-fi fantasy writing group, I believe. It's sci-fi fantasy. This book especially is really breaking that idea down of like queer spaces and queer communities, especially with how they intersect with race. So if you're looking for a book that really discusses those topics, I think this is really important. And also, it's just a really good book. But yeah, I hope you guys got some good recommendations from this reading list. I know I'm personally looking for more books, especially that have that sense of queer community. A lot of the queer books we read are about queer characters standing on their own, kind of weathering the world. Those books are really valuable. I think a lot of us feel this sense of isolation, especially growing up. We feel this sense of isolation from our peers, and we feel like we can't belong. But those stories are not the only examples of what it's like to be queer. You know, it's not just us and the love interest, you know? And I think it's just so important to show other types of queer relationships, particularly platonic relationships. Friend groups and found families are especially important to growing up queer as we find our own sense of community, our own spaces. And I think it's really valuable to have more books about positive queer community spaces. Again, we've lost a lot of our queer mentor figures. We've lost a lot of the people that would be making up these spaces, but those mentor relationships are still really valuable and important to the community. You know, we want to show a wide range of sexualities, of identities, of gender, of BIPOC queer individuals, but I think it's also so important to show a wide range of age groups, and I think it's important to show that those platonic, those mentor relationships are just as important and valuable to the queer experience. And they're also just so lovely to read because they really do give queer readers this sense of acceptance that you can't really get from any other type of reading experience. There's something so lovely and wholesome about reading those kind of relationships, especially, you know, if you are an isolated queer person and you don't feel like you have a community. But yeah, I hope that this video was really helpful in recommending some books. I hope it got some people's brains thinking about other types of books that have these dynamics so that you can recommend them to me. But thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later, and happy reading.